What's it like giving up control? Have you ever done it? Have you had to do it? Have you ever had the experience of hanging on so tightly for so long and finally just having to say, you know what? Maybe I don't have this. Maybe I don't know what I'm doing exactly. Maybe, just maybe, God, the one who sees all and everything, has something more for me, for my family, for my life, something that I can't even imagine as I still try to white knuckle this thing, this life, this situation into submission. What's going on, guys? Welcome to An Invite to Peace. I'm your host, Jack Campese, and today we're talking with Jake Cretonia. This one was pretty near and dear to my heart, simply because it's such a genuine and open conversation. And Jake's story, in a way, it's my story. It's a story of giving up on what he thought, what I thought, maybe even what you think you need or what you're trying to control, and just letting go and letting God lead him, lead me, lead us into something better. Divorce, parenting failures, questioning God, questioning church, and understanding that everything guys hold near and dear in life, yes, in case you didn't know, it rests in our prostate. I know, we'll get to that. All right, guys, great conversation. Without further ado, Jake Cretonia. Jake, what's going on? How are you this evening?
Not too bad, Chad. How you doing?
I'm good. I appreciate it's a little last minute situation, but I appreciate you jumping in here. I'm with Jake Cretonia. So as I throw out to you, if I just say failures, if I say low points when it comes to faith, when it comes to marriage, relationships, job throughout your life, first give me a quick background on how long you've worked in policing, what you've done kind of, and then kind of go into kind of where that took you, if you would.
I work at a Midwest law enforcement agency. We're the largest agency in our state. Been blessed with coming into my 26th year now. Throughout my career, I've gotten to do really a lot of things. Patrol, detective. I've worked as been a supervisor for most of my career, or more in my career than I was an officer, right? But I've been on the SWAT side of the house. I've been a trainer out at the training academy. I was the recruit sergeant. I worked in the traffic unit. And then my current role is I'm the emergency response unit commander for my department. And so I've done that for the last four and a half years. And so, so I've had a super blessed career. But I will tell you, like, when you say things like, hey, like failures, like so many things like come to mind over that time, whether it be on like the home front or also on the, like you never stop learning, even on the professional side. And I've had struggles even as late as just a month or two ago that were like really career altering, like struggles. So
career altering, life changing, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it really gives you, like points where like I had to just like give it up to God and just say like, God, I don't even know what I'm supposed to do here, because it was just that difficult of just things I had never experienced, right? But like things where other people's careers were impacted and, jobs were lost and just terrible, really hard things, right? Like you always think like those things are going to happen to someone else, but then when they land in your lap and you're the commander, it makes it even more difficult, right? So
even growing up and then coming into the profession, what would your faith look like? Yeah,
sure. So growing up, I was a cradle Catholic, right? So went to church every Sunday. Had a faith there that I would say wasn't like I always believed in God, right? I never really. There were times like where it's okay to question. I think like, how can is this really real, right? But like I kind of go through the Catholic thing, and all the way through my first marriage was a Catholic, and sometimes like I say this, like sometimes we do faith better than other times, and like your book kind of struck me like you kind of had the same thing, like you go to the big show and there's all these things going on, right? And so,
Not really sure why you're there sometimes. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, like, why do I go, right? Like, it's easy to kind of fall away from it, I think. But I will tell you, like, as I was going through my career, more so like when, like, I had a first marriage that kind of fell apart, right? And it fell apart to the point where, like, I ended up getting divorced. And there was a big point in time there where, like, I leaned heavily on my faith, my Catholic faith, I should say. And like I always say this, like, Jesus is Jesus no matter where. I think sometimes people interpret or sometimes people receive God better under different religions. That's kind of always kind of saw it that way. And so at the time, like, I leaned on the Catholic Church and I was still happy being there. But yeah, like, as I transitioned from, like, my marriage dissolved, we ended up getting divorced as much as I tried to hold it together. Um, the church was constant, right? So I never stopped going to church. I had to get to a place where it was hard to go to church because I had young kids at the time, and I would see other families there, right? And their husband and wife, and they're with these kids, right? But to your point, your book, it's all kind of, sometimes you just don't know what the real story is going on behind, right? So, like, you see people and you're like, okay, they seem seemingly happy, and people might have seen me and said, hey, that guy seems like he's happy enough, and you don't know that my life's basically imploding on the backside. And so, like, I remember making a conscious decision to God, like, God, I'm okay with where I'm at. Like, I just, you know what I mean? Like, help me move through this. If this is how it's supposed to be. And that really, like, my faith journey got stronger actually going through the divorce and through the other side, where I just kind of gave it up to God. I was just like, I don't know what to do. But I will tell you this much. I understood something. Like, the more I tried to control my situation, everything hit a dead end. Like, I could not hold my marriage together. And there came a point in time where, like I had tried everything. The last thing I was going to do was like, hey, I'm just going to do the thing I didn't want to do, was for me to be the one to say, I want the divorce, right? And I was going to counseling. I was doing all these things. I was, you know what I mean, everything I could. You know what I mean? The hard thing is, like, at the time, like, admittedly, I was going to counseling like probably 4 and 5 days a week just to try and hold it together.
You specifically as an individual, or you guys as a married couple?
Well, okay. we were going as a couple, right? But I was going like an extra, like, 3 or 4 times a week just to hold my world together. Like, it was a hard time, right? And
can you paint that picture for us a little bit? Is that because of the job? Is that because what you're dealing with through that? Is that because of something else? What does that look like?
Honestly, my job, I would always say like this, like, so ironically, I had come back to SWAT as a sergeant during that time period where, like, everything was kind of imploding. And I will tell you, like, I had to kind of compartmentalize my world, where when I went to work, like, I had all these problems at home, right? And the stress of, like, how am I going to keep my marriage together? How am I going to keep all these things? And then, like, we'd get a call out, and then I'd go to work, and I could compartmentalize it just enough to, like, to do the job, right? And there's a lot of, I'm sure you have the same experience, right? Like, you're going to do a warrant, something high risk. You've got to, like, really set your life aside. And then I could hold it together, and then we'd go do, let's say, the warrant. And then as soon as the warrant was, like, clear, you know what I mean? And I'm, like, standing in this backyard and the house is secure, then my world would come, like, flooding back in, is the best way I can describe it. You know what I mean? These thoughts and I just couldn't keep it out, right?
The world outside of the
my
job.
Home life, my everything, my kids, I'm worried about, you know what I mean? Like, just a lot of things, right? And so that was like that was like the hardest period of time, right? And so the counseling was trying to help me get my world, right. Like, I'm trying to figure out my way through this situation, trying to hold it together, trying to do what I could to make it work. And I will tell you, like, everything was a roadblock. everything hit with a dead end. And there was finally a point in time where I was like, okay, because the one thing I kind of told myself was like, I'm not throwing in the towel. I'm not going to do that. And when I finally threw in the towel, and I say this, like, I hold nothing against my ex. Like, we get along fine now. And like, she understood something probably before I did. Like, we got married pretty young, probably got married under the, the wrong, the wrong pretext. Like, you're just young, right? You just don't really know yourself. You don't know who you're going to be growing to be. And she realized that ahead of time. Now, the way things unfolded, I don't really appreciate, but like, I don't fault her for recognizing that we probably just weren't right for one another, and that's okay. And so when I finally just threw in the towel and said, "Hey, I'm gonna ask for this divorce," I really had a conversation with God, and it followed. I was reading a book. I can't remember who the author's name was, but the book was Wild at Heart.
Oh, John Eldridge.
John Eldridge. There you go.
Yeah, I've read it as well.
At the very end of the book, I'm reading this book and understand, like, I came from a Catholic upbringing. So a lot of the way he talked, I was intrigued by that, because I was like, oh man, this is a different way of connecting with God that I had never really, on a different level that I had never experienced. And so at the very tail end of that book, he was like, God sets a path out for you, and you either choose to walk with Jesus down that path, or you don't, and your journey stops right there. And I was reading that book, and I sat up in bed, and I was like, holy shit. Like, it was just like a God moment where I was like, okay, I don't want to do this, but I have to try this, right? And I did. I called my buddy the next day, and I was like, hey, write the papers up for divorce. I'm gonna hand them off to my ex, or my wife at the time. And yeah, like, I tell you what, like the day I did that, I was like, hey, I'm going to divorce. And she was like, oh my God, I can't believe you're doing this, but I think it's the right thing. And I knew right there, like, that it was the right
She was
decision.
waiting for you to, yeah.
It was it. And to be honest with you, my life immediately got better. Like, the pressure was off. Things started trending in the right direction. And as much as I didn't want to admit that, it was the right thing. We got through this period of time where the divorce was kind of took a couple months to finalize. We actually had a pretty fast, when the other person's not fighting you, I will say things go a lot, they go a lot quicker. Yeah. And so, so we got to the end of it. It was finalized, and it was very hard. It was like right before Christmas. It was like right near my birthday. Matter of fact, it was 6 days before my birthday when it finalized. And so I had this experience on my birthday where I was moving out, and my ex was going to take our kids back to her parents' house. They lived out of state, right, for Christmas. And I was like, you know what? I got an apartment. I got nothing but a mattress and like a handful of shit in this apartment. Like, there's nothing good back here for my kids to come experience. I got 2 boys. And so I was like, take the kids. I'm just going to come back here and deal. And so it was like that Christmas. So I go to it's like my uncle's house or something. My parents are there, and it's this festive atmosphere, and my world couldn't have been any more shit at that point. Right. And so
did they know that was pretty much done and a done deal?
Oh yeah, they knew. Yeah, they knew, because I had moved out. I moved out let's say a week before that. My kids went on that trip back down to Canada. And so, like, they're struggling. At the time, they were like 3 and 5, right? It was a very hard, like, they were my best little buds. And so it was a very hard to think, like, okay, they're down here. I want to be with them. My marriage just fell apart. It's over. So I'm driving back from my aunt and uncle's, and I was just weeping. You know what I mean? Like, it was just very hard to be without them. And I'm driving back to this shitty, empty apartment, right? But at that point, I made a decision right then and there. Like, I was like, I had this conversation with God, like, God, I trust you. I trust that this is a path that it's not where I want to be, but this is the path that you've set me on. And like I said, if I could set the stage for you, I'm driving in my Jeep, and it's like that "I'll Be Home for Christmas" song is on, and I am literally like crying. I'm like, why would you do this to
Jeez.
me, God? It was just one of those moments. Like I laugh about it now, but it was like that's how I felt at the moment. I'm like, all right, so I
Yeah.
drive back, but what I didn't know at the time was that I had right around the corner is where I would meet my now wife. I would call her my forever wife. I literally met her, I don't know, like a week later. We started kind of talking, and like I had been through so much in counseling, and part of the thing in counseling, we're like, you'll figure out kind of what you need in a future relationship. And so I really kind of had on my mind, like, who do I need in my life?
Was this, if I
And
could ask real quick, this
sure.
counseling that you were doing, was it counseling that was based out of the church, or was it just like a secular therapist that you got through work or something? Or
So completely random, I wind up with a Christian counselor,
gotcha.
who she didn't, I just went to a counseling group, and I I kind of read bios and stuff, and I kind of picked up because like, hey, I was Catholic, and so you're Christian, and like, hey, that's pretty close. And so it worked out just like maybe a God thing, right? And so I wind up with her, and she was, I want to say she was a female in her 60s, so she was kind of like motherly in a
Yeah.
way. But I will tell you that like started like she's like, I won't talk about anything Christian unless you want to bring it up. And so we actually had a lot of talks about, the way God intended things. And, I mean, she was like, she was like, I want for your marriage to succeed. But there came a point in time where she was like, Jake, I'm going to tell you, like, in my experience, like, this just isn't going to work. Like, and so that was like a slap of reality, right? So that was right around the time. It was like between that and reading John Eldridge that I actually made the decision. But her being a Christian counselor was a huge benefit in my experience. You know what I mean? Like it helped me down that path.
Yeah. Could you tell me, and I'm curious if we could go back a little bit,
Sure.
Catholic Church, you and your
Sure.
wife not doing so well.
Nope.
You're not doing so well. And this is
Nope.
just, again, you read my book, so you told me about it, so my
Mm-hmm.
stuff is in there. But
Mm-hmm.
how often did you go to church and talk to these people and have just this surface relationship where everybody thought everything was good and, hey, Sunday morning, I'm blessed, that's great. However, you said it in your own way, I'm sure. But
Mm-hmm.
was there anybody you had in church or at that time close to you, Christian or with a faith background, that you were honest with and could talk to about that kind of stuff? Or was it more of just a surface thing when it came to that kind of thing?
Yeah. So ironically, the guy who introduced me to my wife was another cop at work, and my now wife, him and his wife, they worked out together, right? And so that was kind of the connection. And he has his wife was a very strong Catholic. He has gone back and forth. Like he has got a pretty strong Catholic faith now, but he didn't really grow up that way. And so um, we kind of had this relationship where we could talk about cop stuff, but we could talk about faith stuff. And then like, I honestly don't even know how we wound up. We just started talking one day. It was just one of those things where I think like God just put him in my life. And he was kind of about 10 years senior to me. He was, had done a lot of things on the job. He had lived a lot of life. He had gone through divorce. He had, gone through a lot of things. And so it was just, I don't know, like, have you ever just felt like sometimes people come in and out of your life at just the right time? And, Jeff was a friend of mine who came into my life at just the right time with just the right mix of, the profession with some faith, with his own questions. And I'm happy to say, like, Jeff's never gone out of my life. Like we connected somehow. And then long story short, a couple years later, like, we're working together out the training academy. He ends up introducing me to my wife. And so that's kind of how we have proceeded. And he never lets me forget, like, hey, I introduced you to your wife. So
Yeah,
at
you
some
hooked
point I got
her
to pay him back for something.
up.
Right.
Absolutely. All
Yeah.
right,
But
so
he's a great dude.
give me then a progression. So you're divorced, your
Mm-hmm.
kids are with her for the holidays,
Mm-hmm.
you're in this apartment. doing your own thing, trying to get back on your feet? How does that look as you try to get back on your feet? Where's the faith come into play? What's the progression there?
So I never really stopped doing what I was doing, right? Like I would tell you in the mornings, my routine was like I'd get up and kind of connect with God in the morning, and that's something I've always tried to do. Um, in like sometimes I do it better than others, right? As life gets busy or as life has gotten good, sometimes those things you struggle to find the same. But there was a peace that I found with God in those, especially in those like those really dark days that really helped me. I meet my wife, and we like hit it off immediately, right? And so life went from being really, really dark to really, really good in pretty short order, right? And but there's always like an asterisk to that. And so about 6 months in, I have now engaged, or I've now asked my wife to marry me, my now wife. Her name's Missy.
This was 6
I'm
months
at
after the divorce.
6 months after the divorce.
Okay,
I'm
seems
like,
quick, but all right.
yeah,
Yeah, I'll take
it seems quick, and you weren't the only one to say that, right? And there,
it.
even my ex would, I suppose, like I mean, I can kind of joke a little bit with it now. It was like that's crazy.
Yeah.
I can't believe that. But like, I will tell you this much: we've been married 10 years, and I don't ever plan on not being married to her. So I'm about 6 months in, and it's now the summertime. So I got divorced in like December. It's now about June or July, and I pop a high PSA on a regular like health screen, and so like my doctor's like, hey, I think you should go get this checked out. So I go and get checked out, and
Hey,
6 months in,
real quick,
sure,
I want to say this is for my audience, but this is probably
sure,
for me too. High PSA. You want to explain what that is? Because it's not clicking for me.
yeah. So that's so I'm on it's part of like my regular like physical, right? Like they pull blood.
Yeah.
And part of that check, if you're a guy, is that prostate specific antigen. And mine
Oh,
came up
gotcha. Okay.
high, came out like,
Gotcha.
yeah. So it came up like a 9, whereas the normal range is like, I don't know, 2.5 to 4 or something like that.
Oh, wow.
And so I ended up going, yeah, like after the fact, it probably wasn't like super crazy high. Like if it was like 25, you're probably dealing with something pretty big. Mine came back a 9. I ended up going to urologist. And they're like, "Hey, we're going to do a biopsy." Okay, great. That wasn't fun, but I'm going to do what I do. And so now, like, I'm going in, and they're like, "Hey, we scheduled this meeting so you can go in and get your results read to you." They wouldn't give them to you over the phone. He goes, "They just don't do that for anything, right?" So I'm walking in. I got my now fiance behind me. We go to sit down, and she's a nurse, right? And as soon as the doctor sat down, I look and see that out of those like 12 samples, right? And out of the 12 lines, there's 2 lines that are really, really long. And I was like, holy shit, I got cancer. And sure as shit, I had cancer.
Oh,
and
geez.
so, yeah, so I went from this like, okay, how is it that God, you just put me through, and not God didn't put me through, like people have a choice, right? Like when in marriage, right? Like you either choose to fight for your marriage or you don't. Like God always wants for marriage to succeed. But it takes 2 people, right? 2 people have to be on the same page, and they both have to work for it. And that just wasn't the case. You know what I mean? So now I've been through that, and I'm like, holy shit. 6 months later, I went from a low to a high. Now I've got cancer, and like, holy shit, we're back here. And I will tell you, like the days, my wife's such a sweetheart, right? So I don't even know that I could deal with me on the backside of like having to deal with that low, because then the worst thing you can do is jump on the internet and start reading.
Oh, yeah, you got everything after that.
Oh, horrible. Like, you know what? The only people on the internet are unhappy people for the most part. And they always say like happy people, they have got a successful treatment and they're going to live their life, and unhappy people tend to, and I get it, right? Because I was there, right? You're looking for answers. You're looking for other people. So then I find out like, hey, I've got this cancer. Here's like I've got a lot of treatment options. I remember like immediately following my urologist, like, hey, we're going to do this full body scan. And I remember like being in this tube after they're scanning your whole body looking for cancer, then to see if it's kind of jumped ship. And I'm like, how the hell did I wind up here? Like, this is crazy. You know what I mean? It's just like you can't even wrap your mind around it. And so I got up the next morning after it had been a couple days, right? I was like, in my conversation with God, it wasn't probably exactly like this, but it was pretty similar. It was like, God, I just don't want to fall into the same despair that I was in going through my divorce, because it was such despair. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I couldn't, there was just your whole world of stress, right? And I was like, I just don't want to be that despondent again. Like, I'm just trusting you, God. And even though like nothing had really changed, right? Within a day or two, like my whole outlook on everything kind of changed. Some peace kind of came over me, and I was like, all right, we're just going to kind of deal with it and see where it goes. So I'm not saying that there wasn't still some hard times, but I just trusted in those moments and kind of meeting God in the morning that things were going to be okay.
What did at this time, like, so you've moved on from your ex.
Mm-hmm.
What did faith look like at this time in church wise? Were you still going to the Catholic Church, or was your new girl, like, was she Catholic too? Did she have faith background?
Yes, she was Catholic too. And
Oh,
so the funny thing is, like, it was funny because we had friends who were just Christian, right? Actually, they accused us when they first met us of being Mormon, which is it was kind of a funny thing. Yeah, I'm not going to go on a tangent here, but my youngest son, who's my wife, he's my stepson, right? And so he had a friend in class who his parents were Mormon, and so they since the kids kind of played together, we would just be friendly, and they'd come over and stuff. So our other friends were like, they assumed that because they saw us hanging with other Mormons that we were Mormon too. And it was kind of a comical thing, because it was like a year or two into our friendship with them. They were neighbors that wound up we've been friends with them for like probably a decade now. There was one Sunday, and we're kind of all sitting out. We had a pool, and we're like, hey, we got to go to church real quick. It's Sunday. It's like, 5:00. And they're like, what? What do you mean you're going to church on Sunday? Aren't you guys Mormon? We're like, no. What did you think we were? We thought you were Mormon. I'm like, no, we're not Mormon. So at the time we were still going to Catholic church. But the problem was that I was not annulled. And at that point, when I'm telling you that story, my wife and I had already gotten married. So it was probably like a 12 months in advance or 12 months in the future. And
you had gotten married again to your new wife, your now wife.
Yep. Okay. Yep. So my wife,
not in the Catholic Church though, obviously.
No, we couldn't, because I wasn't annulled. And so and the problem was that because I wasn't annulled, she was widowed. Her first husband had passed away. So then basically, when in the Catholic Church's eyes, because I wasn't annulled and we got married, then she was in sin too. And so we could not go up and get communion. And so our kids at the time were pretty young. They were, say, like 10, 8, and 7 maybe. And so then they started asking questions like, well, how come you guys can't go get communion and we can? And so that started us down a path where we're like, well, wait a minute. Like, the kids are asking questions like, why can't we be a certain way? Then we started kind of opening up our eyes to like, maybe this isn't the right path for us, because, it says right in the Bible, like Jesus himself says, like, the only 2 reasons for like getting divorced would be if there's an affair, and then the second one. But like, having a spouse that wasn't faithful is a reason for divorce. And so I was like, why do I have to ask the church to annul something? In like the annulment process in the Catholic Church is you basically have to give like a timeline from like your birth to, how your marriage dissolved. And then humans have got to get in there and decide if you pay enough money to, like, is this thing going to be granted or not? And I was like, I'm not going to do that. Like, I didn't feel like it was necessary. I thought my divorce was justified in God's eyes. And I say this like, this is casting no stones on my ex. Like, our marriage ended. I don't hold any grudges. You know what I mean? I'm in a very happy place. She's remarried. We're both better with different, our new spouses. Right. So I say that, like, not casting any stones. Right. But I didn't feel like the Catholic Church had any right to, like, judge or to be the ones to say, like, what's righteous in God's eyes or not. So that kind of started us down a path of where we're at, where we started looking for, like, a different relationship with God.
Was your wife included in that? Like, she had that same feeling as you did, or was that something you kind of felt was important? And
she absolutely did. As a matter of fact, It was the talk with the kids started this whole conversation, and she ended up, because she's just very like, okay, well, if this isn't working, let's go research. She's a very research oriented, and she's like, is always quick to, like, look and start, just like broaden her perspective. Right. She's much smarter than I am. I'll tell you that much. And so she, she started looking, and we found a church. And I will tell you this much, is like a Catholic, do you have any experience with, like, the Catholic Church and how that a mass looks, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So it's very stoic, right? Everyone's, like, very calm. Like, it's like
Follow all the rules and
monotone,
the structure, and the
stand up, kneel, all that things. Well, so we end up going to our church, and we go there on a Saturday night, right? And we were like, okay, hey, let's make it a Saturday night thing. Let's just go experience it. But we go in, and they're very, like, celebratory, like, right out of the gate, right? Like, and I love it. Like they've got a full band. They do the lights, like, their worship. I really just enjoy it. But what a shock!
Was it a denominational church, a non-denominational church? What kind of church was it?
Christian, non-denominational.
Gotcha.
So their focus is just on having a relationship with Jesus, right?
Yeah.
And their view is just to foster that sort of thing.
When you walked in there and you saw the difference between what you were used to in the Catholic Church, and obviously, I mean, I'm very familiar with some non-denominational churches, so I know it's like night and day. What did you guys both look at each other and just like, what in the world is this?
Yeah, listen, 100. Like, we walk in and they start jamming out, and you got to understand, like, the only seats that were available were, like, the
Front
seats
row.
that were right. Well, they were, like, right along. There was two corridors coming into the sanctuary, right? And so the whole sanctuary is dark. They're rocking up on stage, and the only place I could sit was with my back to that corridor. And which, is like a cop. I'm like, I am not digging this in the least bit. Like, I don't like my back being exposed. People got their antennas up. They're rocking out. Where's my stoic church? And so, like, it was kind of crazy. And we're sitting there, and she's like, hey, if you want to leave. I'm like, nope, let's stay here. But what I didn't realize is that once they finished, like, their worship, then the pastor came out, the lights came on, and the message just absolutely, I loved it. You know what I mean? It just connected with me. And so that, that then started the journey. I was like, hey, I really like, this is a message like I never got in the Catholic Church, right?
Do you remember do you remember that first message? Is it stuck in your head as to what it was about? It was like the subject matter?
No, I really couldn't tell you. What I could tell you was that what I always found ironic is, like, whatever the message was, even especially in those early days, was exactly what I needed to hear for that day. And so, so we started going to our church. I started listening to a lot of, like, Craig Groeschel, his podcasts. Yep. So that really started this journey where, and they had like they had like a marriage conference. They had all sorts of stuff that my now wife and I were going to that really just fed our faith. And then the crazy thing was, so, like, I was Catholic, my wife was Catholic, all of our kids were Catholic. And one of our kids was like, I'd really like to get baptized here. And I was like, holy shit, well, if you want to get baptized, then I'd like to do that with you. And so then we had this experience where we all went out to actually a lake that my parents used to live on. Now, keep in mind, my mom's Catholic, right? And I'm like, we're going to go get baptized in the lake where your house used to be on. And she was like, but you're already baptized. So that went over kind of like a fart in church with mom.
Yeah.
And what was super funny is we had this experience where like I got to take part in baptizing. I was baptized, and then all of our kids made this decision on their own to go get baptized. And we did this, traditional water baptism. And it was just super special, right? And my mom is, and I'm sure if she ever listens to this, she will laugh. She was like, hey, I just wanted to send the kids something special. I sent them, little crosses. And I'm like, Mom, we got those crosses, and I'm got to send them back because those are Catholic crosses and we are Christian now. And she's like, no, they're just crosses. I'm like, Mom, I'm totally kidding you. Like like, yes, we love them. They're perfect.
You had me worried there for a second. I was like, wait a minute. I don't know if I can't push back on this a little bit.
Yeah, it's just Jesus, Mom. You can be Catholic Jesus. We could just be Christian Jesus. I think Jesus would just appreciate that we all like having a relationship with him. So yeah. So it's just my sense of humor, my sarcastic sense of humor with my mom. So, and and listen, to her credit, she has embraced, like, she reads the Bible app. She's gone to a lot of the Joyce Myers conferences now. She has done a lot of things where, like, all my brothers, we were all raised Catholic. We're all just non-denominational Christians now. And we all kind of got to the same place with different paths, right? Like it wasn't like we all banded together sort of thing. So
talk to me. A big reason for this podcast is I'm trying to, if it's even possible, but I've been a part of 3 police departments in my career so far. I've been around first responders for almost 24 years now. There is not much talk of faith at work in that situation, or I'm sorry, in those conversations around that, at least in my experience, and most people I talk to have agreed with that. So I'm curious kind of where you are now with your faith, or back then when you guys had just gotten remarried and you're just kind of, seeing what's out there and moving on to a different church. What does that transpire, or how does that transpire and look also in your work career around the officers, around your job? Does that come out there? Are they aware of that? What does that look like with your influence there?
So I would say, like, early on in my career, it was something I just kind of kept to myself, right? Like, was not very comfortable talking about God or any kind of relationship with God. I will tell you that I got more comfortable with it because as I had gotten through my divorce, my story was always like God was faithful. I could, like, my testimony to God being faithful is like I gave up control of my marriage and all sorts of things. It's just like, God, like, everything's falling apart. And I would even say, like, my prostate cancer, that was like losing control. Like, as a dude, everything you care about is in your prostate. I will tell you that much. And you know what I mean? Like, that is on a cancer for the faint of heart. Like,
Yes.
like, you're like, hey, I'm a dude, and God's like, I'm gonna show you something. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so,
That was awesome.
so, like, I had gone through, and I went through, like, that cancer was a testimony that I bring, that I would share. I mean, it taught me a lot. Like, I had to relinquish control of a bit of my sexuality to God. You know what I mean?
Are there times throughout that period for, again, the guys who might be listening that, look, they are interested in this, but they don't have a faith background. They don't know about religion. They don't maybe even believe in God. Are there times that you experience things or just have moments where you're like, you know what, maybe this isn't real. Maybe this is all a bunch of crap. Maybe, I don't know, this is not going well, and maybe God is just some kind of thing that people talk about. Have you ever had those kind of times at all, or has that not really been a part of your maturation?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would say there were times where put it like this, I feel more connected to God than other times, right? And there were times where, like, I feel an emptiness where I think it's pretty natural to question, like, man, is this even real? Like, you know what I mean? Like, if you're, I don't know, but
I guess the hard thing is this, like I've had more experiences where it affirmed that, God was there and right. And so there were times like, like following the cancer, and I went back out on the road. I'd been in the training academy, and there were times where I always think like God sets you up for like big grandiose things, right? Like I can't wait to be here to stop a active shooter to do whatever. And I will tell you, like I had an experience one time. It was like late night. I was a sergeant working overnights, super quiet night in Omaha. And I'm coming down the expressway and there's this car broken down. And, I'm like, all right, I'm going to like, hey, car broken down. I pull over, get behind him. And it's this guy traveling with his family. And so they were in like kind of like this kind of a broke down like minivan. It wasn't super nice, right? And they ran out of gas, and it was him and his wife, and they had 3 kids in the back. And I was like, hey, what's going on? And he's like, hey, there was something with like maybe one of his kids had gotten sick somewhere down south. They had like traveled to see one of their other kids. They're trying to get back home. He's like, I stopped at this place. My buddy loaned me $20. I was able to get a little bit of gas, but it didn't make me all the way. If I could just get another $20-$30 worth of gas, like I just wanted. And what struck me at the time, like it was just, I had youngish kids, right? And it was a super cold night. They were broke down. They had no one to call, right? They weren't from Omaha. They were from somewhere like further west from us. And this guy, like, I could just see the overwhelming desire that he wanted to get his family home, right? Just like I was like, man, if I was in this guy's situation, like I would just want to get my family home and tucked in and warm in their beds, right? So I was like, all right, hey, let's do this. Jump in my car. We went and got, I think, a gas can from somewhere. Got enough gas to get him mobile again, and then I got him to a gas station and I filled his tank. And it's not about like, this has nothing to do with like the act of like, let's say filling his tank and the money involved. Right. But it was like, I felt like such a pull, like God put me right there, even though it wasn't a big deal. Right. Like I didn't I didn't save 1,000 lives. I didn't do anything crazy, but for that moment, like I got to be, something that positively influenced this guy's life. And I always think back on that, like it was just such a fond memory, right? You know what I mean? Like for lack of a better term, like
Yeah.
I'm so thankful that God put me there just in that moment, and how easily, because you know how cops are with like broke down cars, like we never want to stop, right? Like, I might have to change a tire. I might have to do whatever. It's
Right.
super easy to be like, well, I really got to go do something else. And
you have some help
like
coming? Okay.
yeah, like I'm sure they got it covered. I'm sure they're good, right? And so I was like, how easy would it have been to have missed out on that opportunity? And I like, listen, I didn't solve that guy's financial problems. I don't know how it turned out on the back end. I don't know that whatever, but I do know that like in that moment, like I was thankful to God, like, God, this is what you put me here for, just this moment. Wasn't a big deal, but but I was happy to have been there. So that kind of started that. And then I just started kind of sharing more. And I will tell you, like over the years, I've had these experiences, right? Like where I'm talking with someone, whether it's someone going through a fellow officer going through a hard period of time, or it's like whatever. And I'm like, hey, and this is like really stepping outside of my comfort zone. Hey, can we just pray like right here and now? Can we just pray together? And Chad, I've never had anyone say no. Never in ever since I've started doing it. No one's ever said no. And so
even
like,
officer wise.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Like there have been times where I was like, fuck, I'm like, my heart's beating. Like I'm about to say this, right? Like I'm going to ask this person to pray with me. They're going
Right.
to tell me I'm stupid. And like, no. And like, it was like a Catholic upbringing. Like we pray in our heads. We don't pray out loud. And I like feel pretty blessed that I've had pretty good people in my life that to mentor me or to be that role model who have prayed out loud. And so like, I don't know, Chad, there are times where I don't know the right things to say, but I'm just going to say what comes to heart or comes to my mind and into my heart and hope that it's the right thing. And like by God's grace, it always kind of has been. Whether I, probably think I sound dumb on the backside is a whole other thing. But, I've had, my neighbor, his dad committed suicide and him and his mom were sitting there grieving. And it's like, shit, what do you say? But can we pray about it? And I didn't really know where their faith was at. And they were like immediately circled up and like, yeah, let's pray. I'm like, oh shit. Like, oh, this is working out. Or I've had, people in my office who are struggling, going through divorce, going through whatever, like, hey, can we just pray about it? And they're just, yeah, let's do it. So, and then there are times where like, I think back of all the times, like you ever felt like you ever missed a moment? Like,
many times.
You know what?
Many times.
Like shit. That was a good opportunity. And I just totally didn't. I should have just stepped up and just said, let's do whatever.
Yeah.
Let's
mostly out of fear. Yeah. Out of fear of rejection. Like they're going to say no, or they're going to laugh at me, or whatever. And
I tell people, like anytime, like, well, listen, like there's plenty of times I've been going to calls. I was like, God, just give me the strength, give me the wisdom. Like this is, just like the craziest things. Like I could feel God's presence there. So like now that we're having this discussion, it just reminded me of probably one of the other more significant times in my entire career. Was when I was still that same midnight sergeant, and I had just gotten to work. I was sitting down, I had like my super mega awesome energy drink right next to me. I'm starting to type out the details. I hadn't even hit in yet. I had my gear right next to me, and they had a suicidal party with a gun out in front of his house, right? And so I get this frantic phone call, and I'm like, boom, I grab my shit, I'm out the door. And so I'm racing there, and the information's coming in, and they're like, yeah, this suicidal veteran, he's out in front of his residence. They kind of have him surrounded, right? He's sitting there in a kind of a cross leg position with this rifle. And I was like, my heart's racing. Like I'm nervous going there, right? Like I have no qualms saying that. Like I'm like, this is it. The radio traffic was such that I was like, we are going to end up shooting this guy. Like it just wasn't sounding good. And I was like, holy shit. So I'm praying literally the whole way there. And it probably took me 5-10 minutes to get there. And I'm like, God, just please give us peace, give this suspect peace. I don't know what the deal is. And so when I get there, it was every bit as bad as I thought it was going to be. And so they pretty much have this guy surrounded. A lot of cops behind their cars, a lot of rifles. I grab my rifle. I'm running up there. And I take this kneeling position behind a car, and I just start making this conversation. And I'm like, hey, buddy, you don't want to do, like, we're good. We're like, hey, we're on the same team. You're military, we're law enforcement. It's like we're cousins, and we're just trying to sell this narrative. And there was a point in time where he manipulates this rifle, and like my safety came off, and like, here it is. We're going to end up shooting this guy. And he ends up putting this rifle down, right? Like it was just this God intervened. The kid just came to his senses. He puts this rifle down. I'm like, holy shit. I can't believe how close we just came to dumping this guy. We get him scooped up. We get him in the ambulance. And then all of a sudden, what we didn't realize is he had taken a shit ton of pills, and he starts vomiting. He starts seizing. And I'm like, hey, let's get him out of here. And boom, he's gone. Well, unbeknownst to me, this whole scene played out right in front of his mom, who was like literally within view of this. And I didn't find out till later. She was like, I can't thank you for not killing my son. And like the gravity of that, we almost just killed this guy right in front of his mom. And as it turns out, like he was a really, really good guy. He had been through a lot of stuff in the military. He had lost a lot of friends. He was struggling horribly with PTSD. And I am to this day, like in my heart, I know those prayers intervened. I mean, like that was like God intervened in that situation because it was so close. But it was so like, once again, I don't know. Well, I kind of know. Like he did kind of recover like we had some contact with him after the fact, and he was very thankful. His mom was super thankful. Like, I'm so thankful that you didn't kill my son right in front of me. And like, that just struck me, just hit so far home, because I was like, man, I got a son, and my son could struggle like that one day. And like, how that, you just connect with them on a level as a parent, not so much as a first responder. And I was like, oh my God, I can't believe like that almost went that way. So I think the times like where I've gotten to with my point with my journey now is like sometimes when things aren't answered, or really, really horrible things happen. You know what I mean? I know God is a loving God, and God doesn't wish for bad things. And I've had the same struggles with God. How can you let something happen, you know, that is just evil? Like, you have times where kids and kids are hurt or killed, or women have suffered horribly, or like whatever that is, right? But I also know like God gives us free will, and he doesn't wish for these things, but he, like men and women have free will to choose to do really horrible things. And so and that, I guess that was like the hard, like reading your book, I'm like, okay, I I understood your struggle. Sometimes I don't know, maybe just because of the way I was brought, I never really questioned it as hard. Maybe I should have. I don't know. That's something still struggle as like as a guy, as a sinner. Like I still view myself as like a sinful person. You know what I mean? And so like I struggle. Like, hey, I need to be better about stuff. And like the same thoughts that you had about like, man, am I the best father I can be? Oh man, dude, like I struggle with that. Like I got 3 boys, and sometimes I think I've failed them more than I have succeeded. But where I've tried to do better is like I own the failures. Like, buddy, I failed you. Like I lost my temper. I wasn't there like how I should have been. And I've had like my oldest son is he's 19 now, and I think the biggest regrets I had is going through the divorce. I was so sad, but I completely lost track of how sad my kids were. And so yeah, that's probably like the hardest, where like even when I found my wife, I was so happy to have found her and been happy again, but I lost sight of the fact that my kids were really struggling. And that's the part, like I could never get that time back. I wish I could. Um but I've like have gone on trips with my son. I've kind of owned it. Like, oh buddy, I wish I could have paid better attention to you. I wish, like how they were struggling in their heart. Like, oh man, dude, I would go back and just like give them the love they needed at the time. You know what I mean? And kind of denied myself a little bit more. But we've had that conversation. Like I've owned that and like asked for forgiveness, and that's all I can do is like try and model like what does that look like to own those failures, in hopes that they don't do the same things. And kids
What
are. Oh, good.
I was gonna just ask, what if you're willing to talk about it, what kind of has the response been as you try to, with the kids? What kind of response did they give you as you tried to own that and kind of walk that back a little bit, or apologize for it, or just be honest and authentic about what happened?
Listen, more grace than I deserve to get, right? And and I've had other conversations with other guys, who've like maybe experienced the same thing, and they're like, you know what, like your kids don't even remember most of that stuff. And I think maybe the hard part is like I remember it. You know what I mean? Like I think you had. Oh, there was a point in your book, and it just struck home. Like I think with your firstborn, when you came home after a late shift, and is your oldest is a daughter, right?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. So your daughter was crying, and you, in this moment of like frustration, you had yelled at her.
Yeah.
I did the exact same thing with my son.
That was a bad night. Yeah.
Yeah. So here's my kid, and he, you know what I mean? Like he was an infant. I was a new parent. I didn't know how to really deal with it. And like, I had gotten very frustrated because like there was nothing I knew could do to make him stop crying. I like, I like kind of yelled out in that same frustration, had screamed at him. Now, like my son doesn't remember that in the least bit, but I
Right.
remember that. And that's the pain of having to remember that shit. That like, I'm like, what a pile of a dad am I to do that? And like how much my oldest son is, I will tell you this much. The dude has filled with more faith at 19 than I have had my entire life, right? Like, I don't even know where he came from. I'm like, you're such a faith-filled dude. I don't even know his journey is just amazing. I learned from him just as much as maybe he would say, but I'm like he doesn't remember that, but I do. And it just is hard to, like, I wish I could go back now that he's like this. And he would laugh. Like, he's such a stud wrestler and he's an athlete and he's just this tough kid. But I'm like, man, I would go back in a heartbeat to have you back as an infant just so I could hold you again at that age, And I think so much of the time, like, you wish those years away, those young years, because they're hard, right?
Until they go
things
away.
are hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then like I would do anything to have that back for 5 minutes just to have him back as like my little buddy. You know what I mean? So yeah, those are probably the hardest, the hardest thing that maybe that you're left with is that you have to remember those failures, even though you've been given grace and forgiveness, is that you have to live with them. Maybe that's like the punishment, with it.
Of
So what I
sorts.
mean? So
Yeah.
of sorts, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, but all my kids, they're all good. They're all good dudes. I probably have failed them more than I have succeeded. There are times where, you get stuck in your own career and you're working these goofy shifts and you're doing this exciting stuff, but you're not home and you're not present, or you come home and you're, I got no temper. I got no patience. You know what I mean? I have a temper. I have no patience.
No patience. Yeah.
And oh man, dude, like, yeah, that's the hard stuff. You know what I mean? That's the stuff that you struggle with is like, I wish things had been different in that end, but so.
Well, so that's okay. So let's take it from there then. You are, I mean, let's go full back forward now. You're at the non-denominational church. You guys are almost remarried at this point.
Yep.
Give us some hope, give us some healing, give us some positive. It looks like now moving forward from all that, still living with you have to always live with what you did. You have to always live with
absolutely
the regrets and the memories, but moving forward with that faith, with your job now, with your new wife, with your kids growing up, what's it look like now?
Yeah. I mean, listen, life's amazing. Right. And so like it has given me an awareness that, I got like family. It's like someone told me this one time, and I don't know even where they got it. People don't remember what you did, but they'll remember how you made them feel. And so, like, I try to embrace that more. Listen, I've had a great career. I've got some like phenomenal stories, right? But I want my family to remember me for being different, right? And so, trying to be more mindful of that. Obviously, my current role is super, super stressful. I'm gone a lot. But even like last night, like my son came in, he injured his knee. He had to come in for a medical appointment. We're trying to get him healed up so he can go back to his wrestling career. But we were all piled on the couch late at night, being able to watch like a movie all together as a family. And man, like just those moments, I'm like, there's probably nothing better than to have that back. And so you just have to recognize the moments of like, okay, hey, we might not always get this right. Like I always say, like, there's never a shortage of good things that can happen. There's never a shortage of bad things that can happen in your life either. Like you just kind of have to embrace the moment for what it is and recognize the good, like when they're there, and then try and have those moments of connection when you get them. And it's been harder, like I need to be more mindful of like each kid has got their own kind of needs, and to make sure that like as a dad, like I'm affirming them like in the ways they need to be affirmed, right? Like they each need to hear, and what they need is different. Like each one of them, like I've got two of my own that are biological. I've got my youngest is my stepson. His dad's not here. I would tell you a lot of times like I ask myself, like, what would his dad say to him, right? And because I have to be that dad, and like for not being my son, we're a lot alike, and so we butt heads quite a bit, ferociously at times. But I always tell him, like, hey, listen, like just because you're not biologically my son, I think God put me in your life. And even my wife would say, like, her first husband's name was Joe. Like, Joe was not meant to raise Sam, right? And so, yeah, so like that's a struggle because like I feel like sometimes like I let him down and I let Joe down, right? And so then, like I'm always trying to like, man, it's like a daily struggle too. Like you got to lean into prayer. You got to lean into not missing those moments. You know what I mean? In like, hey, if you need something, sometimes what you need to hear, like that impact a father, his words can have on their son, it can be hard, right? And so, like, there's things that I probably needed growing up that I didn't hear from my own dad, who was also in law enforcement.
Oh
So
man,
that's a whole nother.
That's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah, that's a whole nother. Like my dad and I went probably a couple years without talking, just because we're in a much better place now, and I'm thankful for that. And um, yeah, that was a whole nother. That's a whole nother thing right there. Like we had a big falling out, and I will tell you that we were like I got into a point where I was like, listen, I'm not. It's like a generational thing, right? Like I don't like he didn't have a great relationship with his father, that continues on down. And I understand that, right? But there's a period of time where I was like I'm a freaking adult. I've had my own police career. You're not going to talk to me a certain way. And so it caused this huge strife in the family, right? Like we didn't talk for probably 2-3 years, right? And as that thing was starting to get amended, and I would tell you this much, like you never could have convinced me that my dad could ever have like a change of heart, like a heart posture change, right? And it was like, no way, there's no way, right? Like, and you think of like God intervening with like the hardest of hearts. And so there was like one day I was racing down to work. We were in the middle of this big, the College World Series always comes to Omaha, and I'm racing down. We have our meeting before like one of the days of the events. Like we're in mid session, and so like when the CWS is in full swing, like in my role, I'm there at like 9:00 in the morning, and I'm there until midnight. Right? We see this whole thing through. So I'm racing down to this meeting, and I was like maybe 5-10 minutes away, and on my work car, my phone pops up. My cell is connected to it, and it's my dad. And I'm not answering it. I'm 5 minutes away from this meeting. I got a million things running through my head. We're got a busy day. I'm like, all right, I'm going to answer it. All right, what's going on? And my dad, and I'm in, like I could tell from the tone of his voice, like there was something there, and he was like very, very like serious and emotional, and he was like, it took my own son opening up my eyes to see that, like what I had been missing or what I've been doing. And it was like a very like he called me up to apologize over like years of stuff. And I was like, first of all, I'm floored. Quickly, yeah. I'm texting my boss. I'm like, I ain't going to be there for the meeting. I can't hang up on this. Right. And so it was a moment, like it was very, super special to me. It was like, there was a lot of things in that moment, a lot of forgiveness both ways. Right. And I was like, but what I was struck was like, oh my God, like if God can touch my dad's heart and change that posture, like there's nothing, nothing that God can't do, because you never could have convinced me. We had come out of kind of a really rough period where we weren't talking, and I'd all but like disowned my own dad.
That was the first phone call since you weren't talking, or
No, there had been some contact, right? Like we were kind of easing back into this, and
oh,
mostly
gotcha.
like you
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like, so like to get that phone call and to have that kind of hurt posture change was pretty crazy. I mean, it was like one of those times where like it kind of stops you dead in your tracks. Where I was like, I never could have seen that.
Yeah.
Like,
Did
if
he
you had
mention why that happened? Looking back, did he say, was it a faith thing? Was it just something, just a realization? Did he say why?
It had to do a little bit with faith. I think it was just because I had shared my own faith as to why I felt how I felt, and like there was a period of time where like, I was so angry with my dad. I was like, it was unhealthy, right? And that was a lot of like I had to let go of a lot of stuff, and so when he called, you know what I mean. But I then like you forgiveness. You do it for you, right? You don't do it for the other person. I mean, the other person can benefit from it. But mostly, I've always seen like if I'm going to forgive someone, you do it for your own well-being, right? Like you have to let it go
Gotta
so
let
that
it
you
go.
can move
Yeah.
your heart. It's kind of the same thing with my ex. Like I had to let a lot of stuff go, and I can honestly say like I have total forgiveness in my heart. Like I don't harbor any ill will. And the same thing with my dad. Like there had been a lot of anger there, and I really had let it go. And so then to have him kind of out of the blue make this phone call, like I could even tell you exactly where I was in the city when that phone call and exactly what I was, you know what I mean, it was doing, was kind of I was like, all right, you know, God has his hand in everything. God can change a heart, even though you don't think so. Like these things do matter and the prayers do matter. And, you know.
So, I mean, clearly God has had his imprint looking back, at least just from the conversation we've had over your entire life. And I'm curious, again, you're a 26-year veteran of the police department, knowing the guys, knowing the culture. If there were people listening that, thought, well, maybe because these guys are talking about this, maybe I'm a little bit open to it. I don't know, whatever. God could be whatever. Is there a way, having been through this for so long, is there a way that you would recommend somebody explore that a little bit, or even just dip their toe into it? What's the way you would say they would reach out, or
Yeah, I mean, first of all, like I think God always puts people in your path. Sorry, life and path to be a good influence, right, or to be a mentor at just the right time. And so, first and foremost, you have to open up to the people around you. And I think people would be amazed if they just shared a little bit of their faith. Maybe there's some connection to be made there. Like I have connected with other people, whether through the profession or through cancer or through divorce. It always usually starts with something. It's like something hard in your life, right? Like that's usually where the connection is, a hard call. People like I do peer support, and that has been a great way to connect. And I think the younger generation of officers, they connect better. They open up better to those things.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
Absolutely.
that's, you know what I mean? So like as the veterans, like we have, especially if you've gotten to a place of faith, don't be afraid to share it. Don't be afraid to, you know what I mean? If you see someone struggling, don't be afraid to, hey, can I pray with you? And so those types of things, I will tell you, like, I always will recommend like books that I've read that like, hey, this thing touched me. I don't know if it will impact you the same. A lot of people listen to podcasts, so I like to listen to podcasts. Especially like, I don't know if you're like standing in a part-time job where you're just like watching something, if you throw an earbud in your ear and you listen to God while you're protecting. I would tell you, for a long time, I worked up off-duty gig at a Jewish temple. And so it was always kind of like, especially as you get through the Bible and you're like, hey, the Jewish people were God's chosen people, right? Like we're Gentiles. But the Jewish people was God's and still is God's, Israel's still God's chosen people, right? And so I would work at the temple because they would do their services on Friday night. They liked having law enforcement there for all the reasons why in their history why they, feel very vulnerable. And so I was like, yeah, like I get to be here protecting God's chosen people, but I'm going to listen to Craig Rochelle and like so I would listen to podcasts as I was standing there, and I was always like, hey, this is like if you get stuck on an assignment where I think over time cops develop that ability to like have kind of divided attention. You can be present scanning for threats, but you can also be listening to something in the background. And that's kind of how I, have done, develop my faith over time was, a lot of that. So I suppose those would be the things I would recommend to other listeners is like, don't be afraid to ask and don't be afraid to, like explore like other things, like, especially like if you're a lot of churches now, they will they'll do recordings of their services.
Services, yeah.
Yeah, and so I'm always like, hey, if you don't know if the church is right for you, why don't you listen to like our church has got all their stuff online, and especially if like Life Church is Craig Rochelle. Like, hey, if you're, I'm not, and this isn't a plug, I don't belong there, but I just really enjoy their content.
I get a feeling you're a Craig Rochelle fan. Yes, that's why.
Oh yeah. So absolutely. It was a big influence in my life, right? Yeah. So he comes to mind the most easily. My church here in town is Lifegate, and so we've got really great, like our pastors. I've connected with them, but like since they record everything and you can go back, like if you have someone that's struggling with divorce, or you have someone that's struggling with whatever, infidelity and whatever, whatever it is, whatever your struggle, you can usually go back and scroll through and see like this message is on whatever, and then you just listen to it, and then does that connect with you? And I was like, wherever you go to find God is good, and I don't think all people receive God in the same religion. Like my mom, like she receives it best, and my dad going to Catholic church, and that's great. As long as you're going and that's where you receive your message, that's super cool. If that's not, if it's somewhere else, then sometimes you just have to kind of seek that out,
Gotcha. And I think probably you'd be under the same opinion that God will lead that. God will figure that out for you 100%. If you're in that spot.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, just open up your heart to it, I suppose, would be the best gotcha. Thing you could do, right?
Open up your heart from a cop to other cops, or from a cop to first responders. Do first responders open up our hearts? Is that the right talk for us? Is that too emotional, too heartfelt?
I think so. Listen, you can't do this job with you know what I mean? You can't do it with a sheltered heart. Now, I will say, like, cops can get a little dark about stuff, you know what I mean? You get kind of like that cynicism, where you see enough death and stuff, you kind of get that dark humor that can develop. But I think like deep down, you can't do this job and not have it affect you and not have it, kind of, oh man, you just see some really, really bad things, right? And what cop can go in on a domestic, like when I was a young cop, went into a domestic in a really rundown apartment complex, and it was a family that had immigrated from Africa, right? And the dad had really cut the mom up really bad, and so dad's going to jail. Mom is like horribly wounded. She's going to the hospital. And the kids were all stacked up on the couch, right? It was just this really, really nasty kind of apartment, sparse, no Christmas tree up. I don't even know if that was in their culture, right? That they really understood. But as a young, like, it's December, it's freezing outside. These kids were like maybe 8 to 2 in a row, probably like 5 or 6 of them on this couch. And I just remember going like I didn't know what to say at the time. I'm like, so are you guys excited for Christmas? And they all just kind of gave me this blank stare. And the one kid just shrugged his shoulders. And I was like, well, that was a really dumb thing to say, Jake. Like that, like of course they're not excited. Mom's going to jail, or mom's going to the hospital. Dad's going to jail. They don't have anything in this place. I remember like going home that night and just like kind of wrestling with the same, like, God, how do you let, like, they are just like, they're not going to have a good holiday season, whatever it was they believed in, right? and like how much trauma those kids had that night. And like it just weighs it, you know what I mean? Like, how do you walk away from that and not feel impacted? I remember coming home because my oldest was just an infant at the time, and like just looking down at him in his crib in a warm house that was decorated for Christmas, that was going to be, like still a happy time for us. And just remembering like the disparity in life and how, you know what I mean? Like that resonated, like how can God allow that difference? And so, yeah, I mean, like things like that. Oh man, Chad, like, hey, boy, this podcast has just dredged up all sorts of things I hadn't thought about in years, right?
I'd actually have one more question. I want to be respectful of your time. So
oh, no, you're good. Yeah.
Just one more. We see, this doesn't have to go long. I'm just curious. You mentioned trauma, and not specifically your own, but that brought the question to mind. 26 years, law enforcement career, divorce, situations with your kids. We talk a lot about mental health these days, a lot about first responder wellness and all that kind of stuff. And another reason that this podcast exists is because I think we talk about all that in a vein of, for the most part, at least from what I've seen, medication, hard work, therapy, counseling. The spiritual side, the spiritual identity seems to be left out of that almost completely, if it's not just kind of walked over with. And there's a spiritual component, but we're not going to really talk about that too much. And just over the years that I've been doing this, it seems like every single person I've talked to, including you tonight, that has had any kind of redemption story, any kind of success story over the years coming out of that kind of stuff, it always has a spiritual basis. There's not one person that's ever been talked to, by me at least, that hasn't had that spiritual basis to come back, to be able to apologize to their family, to be able to come out of that darkness. I'm curious, have you ever seen that? Or, well, seen it as, do you have friends or anyone that you know of that doesn't have that spiritual component, but has been through things, obviously, in the long run, without that spiritual basis? Would you have been able, without a faith, to get through what you've gotten through, you think, without that spiritual component present?
Oh, no, not at all. I mean, like, I guess what comes to mind is like people who have, if you've gotten through hard things, but you lack the faith, there's usually some other component there, like an addiction or something that has then becomes like the out. And that's why I don't like, do I have friends who that have gotten through hard things and really aren't like super spiritual? Yeah, but I always think like God shakes you. He always shakes you to get your attention, right? And that can come early on, it can come later in life, but he always gets your attention. And do you use that as a, as a catalyst to deepen your faith, or you don't? I just think like faith makes it like better, like what to get through it. I mean, like you will get through things better, and you will see things, through a different lens. You know what I mean? With that faith based, or, having some sort of spirituality, whatever their journey looks like. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I can't sit here and say there's never been anyone who has gotten through it without.
I can't either. I've asked everybody that I talk to, and nobody that I've asked has ever not had that spiritual component that's been able to sit here and say, I'm moving forward in this awesome way. So I'm just waiting for somebody to be like, yeah, I don't have any belief in that, and I think there's nothing.
I don't need it, and
I'm an accident, but all is good and life is good. I just haven't had that. So,
No, I agree with you on that one. I can't, nothing really comes to mind, because everyone that I know, especially like later on in my career, my really good friends, and like law enforcement is such a, I'll be able to quit the job one day, and I'm mentally starting to prepare myself to make that transition, right? But it's like the loss of the family is going to be the hardest part, right? Because like it's just a amazing group of individuals that you go to work with, men and women that you laugh, like those are the best laughs I've ever had in my life. to some degree, outside of my own family. You experience these things that not a lot of people get to experience. And then, yeah, like someday when you have to give that up and you don't get to go to work every day, as much as I know everyone like looks forward to that, like, hey, I don't have to go in anymore and I don't have to do whatever. Man, that's such a hard thing. Like it stresses me out to think of not, not getting to go experience those things with your family. You know what I mean? Like you said, just you and I sitting here, like you bring up stories and it brings up memories to me and vice versa. I think probably things run in your head, and that's a hard loss. You know what I mean? So I've been trying to be more mindful of maintaining connections outside of here with my law enforcement friends, because I don't want to lose those connections once I hang up my hat for
You
the
got a
final
few
time,
years
right?
left. You got a few years left, right? Not too long.
It's around the corner, so I'm at a point now where I could leave at any point, right? And I've started actively looking outside of here. I've started actively like kind of steering my ship towards like, okay, like I like as a younger officer, you're working for all these credentialing, you know what I mean, for like the SWAT world, the whatever path it is you want to take, right? You start going to training classes and whatnot. And now I'm starting to think like, okay, when I leave here, what do I want to do? And what skills am I going to need, or what certifications am I going to need to go do? And so I've kind of got a path in mind.
Do you think?
Like the court.
Do you think that God will make that clear when the time is right and the job is right and the
absolutely
path is right?
I absolutely have because I'm even at a point now where like I'm going to say it probably here first. I've said it around, like I'm have made the request to give up my current position just to go back and be a road lieutenant, so I can start kind of letting go, like transition my job to the next generation, which is not something typically you get into my role and then you do. Like not many people have done that.
Yeah.
Actually, no one has done it that I've come to mind. Like they promoted out of it, but no one has like consciously asked.
I can't think of anybody doing that.
And so, but a lot of that came down to like my family, like what's best for my family, what's best for like, I'm kind of recognizing I got fewer years left with my kids before they leave for college, and I got to be around for them. I have to kind of remove some stress in my life because I don't want to be the guy that comes home like super stressed all the time and super short and not present and loving for my wife and for things. And I think sometimes like my current role, as much as it's been a blessing, right? It's like been the greatest portion of my career and my life, right? Like you work towards these things, and there's a little bit of pride of letting go of the being the guy, right? Like there's only one of me, and my phone kind of catches all the, and that's like where the stress comes in, right? Like my phone's on 24/7. People aren't calling because things are going well.
Right.
And so then you have to start, like dead of night, you're asleep and the phone rings and you have to jump back into cop mode, which I found is a very hard thing to do from a dead sleep. Most people, they start their day and they kind of start working towards getting ready for work. And then they get there and their mind's in the right space. I don't necessarily get that all the time, right? So like the phone rings and people are throwing a lot of information at you, and then you're having to make decisions on what you're activating and what you're not. And I would say this, like there's some pride that comes with that. Like you're like, I like being the guy and I like making the decisions, and I like, like you put the right chess pieces in place and then things turn out well. There's some ego involved in that, right? So to let that go
kind of becomes your identity too, a little bit, that you hold on to.
Yeah. And kind of what I've had to like learn with is like, hey, I got to be the same guy, and I got to let that go and let God steer that path. And you mean hope that he puts me in the right place. I don't hope, right? Like I know
he will,
like God will steer me in the right path. And yeah, it's okay. Like I said, but I feel pretty confident. Like you have to always be setting up the next generation to take, to take the reins. and I want to be a resource to whomever takes my role after me. And like I said, what I'm super thankful to God, and I hope my guys feel the same way, is like I've left it better than I got it, right? And I hope the next person takes it and leaves it even better than they received it from me. And then that's how we keep building this thing forward. But the job and it's been like the pinnacle of my career, right? So it's kind of hard to think, well, why would you ever give that up? Well, it's very hard to be on point, for coming up on the last 5 years has been that world. Like every crisis kind of hits your phone and then you're having to do this. And so my family's paid a penalty, which means that I've not done the best at being a good husband, at being a good father at times, because I come home super stressed, and then then you're rolling back out, and then they don't get it sometimes, and then you have to come home and like own it and be like, yeah, I probably failed you on that one. But
well, you will have to give it up. The question is, will you do it on your timeline or will you be forced to? So it feels like your timeline is probably the best way to go.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I will tell you, there was a moment there, especially in the last couple of months, where I thought, like, things were not going so well that I might be forced out. I'm going to digress into like my team right now, and like I know you talk with Paul, and Paul is someone who I don't know really where this got started, but I would imagine Paul was one of the founding anchors of this, right? And so like our SWAT team, we really have had like just I can't say it's anything less than like a godly run of, like, we just have not had to take a lot of lives. And I talk with other commanders who, man, their teams they're getting in like officer involved shootings like a couple times a year. I'm always just intrigued by that. I'm like, holy smokes, like how is it that we are not? But I will tell you, even before I got there, they started praying before every warrant. So they would circle up as a team, and they would pray and invite God in to be with them on the warrant, and pray for wisdom, and pray to make the right decisions and discernment. And but they've always done that. And like I have to say, like that's got to be like there is Jesus is there with the guys influencing that, because there's no way we are the busiest. I wouldn't say we're like the busiest team, but we're like, I had probably 3,000 warrants in the last 20 years. And have only had like maybe one or two officer involved shootings in that entire time. Like it's kind of a crazy.
Yeah, that seems
just a crazy
percentage
run,
wise.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Just, it's like, it goes beyond statistics. I'm like, statistically, this is not possible, but it's possible with God. And so we would pray together. And then I started like reaching out, and I had a friend of mine who was commander from another state team. He's like, "Hey, would you come talk to our team?" And I was like Chad, I'm gonna tell you, like I'm a very average guy who's had a exceptional career, right? Like there's nothing special. I don't look at me and say like Jake's a super special guy, and I have owned and earned everything. Like no, like even now, I kind of feel like, how did I wind up here, and why is it that I'm entrusted to do, like to have whatever, like to be in the seat that I'm in right now? Like I really don't feel like that exceptional of a person to have wound up there, right? And so when this guy asked, he's like, "Hey, can you come talk to my team?" Right? And they were all having a team gathering.
Was there a reason he asked specifically for that? Was it because of the faith aspect, or because of just supervisory experience, or
well,
what?
I think it was just like at the time. So I'm going to set the stage, right? Like there was a guy who was on our team, like maybe a decade beforehand, and this guy, he left the police department to go be. He was in the Army Special Forces. He's done crazy things, right? He's lived this larger than life experiences. He is one of the kind of the founding members of our high threat CQB method that we use to this day, right? So so I'm going to set the stage. He came and talked to their team the year before, and then then my friend asked, and he's like, "Hey, would you come talk to us?" And I'm like, "Holy shit!
How do I follow that up? Yeah,
yeah, seriously." And that's exactly what I said. I go, I'm going to be real honest with you. I go, I will think about it, but I'm going to pray on it and just say, I just got to see, like, do I even have anything to give you, right? And Nate goes, he goes, "Oh my God." He goes, I was just taken back by the fact that you said you were going to pray on that. And so then I was like, you know what? I'm going to, like, if this is where God's calling me, I'm going to go ahead and like go there. Right. And I was like super nervous, right? Like I said, I don't have any like crazy stories, right? I don't think our team is any better than their team. I mean, in terms of like, there's no earth shattering stories. And I don't have like one of these stories that you would get called to like speak in front of the NTOA. We just have, my experiences are, and we've had like plenty of crazy stuff, right? But I didn't think it was like that crazy. So go out there, and I had like come up with a PowerPoint. I was like talking about stuff, but the very last thing that I had in the PowerPoint was a slide of our team, and we were all circled up and we were praying together before a warrant. As a matter of fact, it wasn't before a warrant. The picture I had was Paul's last day on the team. I had said, "Hey, can we circle up and pray as a team to send you off?" Right. And I was super nervous about that because like Paul was kind of a legend on the team. I was just kind of like, I'm just like the nobody lieutenant, right? Like I'm going to circle up. I didn't like, have the right words. I just kind of prayed what came to heart. But my very last slide was that I said this. I was like, hey, the most special thing about our team is that they invite God into every warrant, that they're moral, they're ethical, they're godly. We don't want to take lives. We want God to walk with us. So I just kind of put that out there. That was kind of like a big thing to put out there for me because I was like, I don't know these guys. I don't know how that's going to be received. And there was like a handful of guys on the back side after I kind of gave this presentation who stopped me and was like, I can't believe you could say that. We're amazed by that. We would love to be able to do that. One guy in particular, who was on their team, who I still communicate with, he's like, so I ended up getting like a text, like, I don't know, like a week or two later, and they were like, we're praying before our warrants now. We all circled up and brought that. And I was like, that's probably one of my most special memories, is just to know like that has touched other teams and that they are now doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's like, listen, I don't think like I didn't crush the world, but I mean, how many, like I do think like praying it up before you go to warrant, that means something, right? And God's going to be with you. And so the fact that I could have like even a small part of someone else's story, that they then had the courage to do that, like that, you know what I mean? It means something to me. It was like, those are probably the most special things about my career. And it really had nothing to do with law enforcement per se. Like it wasn't like some crazy, like, oh, and you stopped 10 active shooters with nothing but your whatever.
String. Yeah.
yeah. No, nothing that crazy. But that, to me, that was like some of the best memories that I have, still to this day on the job. So,
well, tell me this.
So, my faith.
Well, you mentioned it. I mean, you just mentioned it. They came up to you and they said, "Oh, we didn't know we could do that, or we don't feel comfortable doing that, praying, speaking as to prayer or acknowledging God or whatever." Looking at the culture, looking at the police culture, the first responder culture, is there a reason you think that we are so hesitant, or that we don't feel comfortable being open and kind of doing that thing if that's our jam, or what's your thoughts on that?
I don't know. Like, it's just, I will say there's more, I've found more, like it's gotten better over the years, right? As a matter of fact, we had a big full team call out, like maybe 2 months ago, and a friend of mine that also goes to the same church, I didn't even realize he did it, but he snapped a picture, and it was our whole team circled up, and we're in front of our armor, and we're all, circled up in prayer. And he was like, "Man, I just had to take this picture." And I got to tell you, like, it's one of my favorite pictures. And so the more that other teams, like, will go out to do like just like within the last, I don't know, couple months, we've had like full team call outs with other teams that were there, and they watch us circling up, and like the crazy thing to me is like there's no shame. Like our team circles up, and anyone who wants to join in will join in. And I do think that the more that we bring that, that posture to our work, the more it just becomes accepted. Like it's like it's crazy that you wouldn't pray before a warrant. Like this is nuts. But yeah, no, I mean, it's like, Chad, it's been like such a blessing in my life. And do I want my kids necessarily getting into law enforcement? I don't know. Like I that's the hard part. And if they want it, then I want it for them. But if they don't want it, I'm okay with that, because I do think it causes cancer. I do think it takes years off your life. I do think your family pays a penalty, for it. And that's kind of the hard part. It's like, how do you wish that side of it on your kids? I got 3 boys, so I don't know.
But it sounds like they have a very strong faith base to lead them through that, at least going into it, if that is a choice that they make.
Yeah. My oldest is probably my most faithful. My middle one, I definitely have to spend more time with him on that journey, right? Like he's got questions. My youngest is a absolute adventurer. He is like he is in that cowboy phase from John Eldridge, that dude.
Oh yeah.
And I think like for him, he needs words of encouragement. My middle one, we need to strengthen the faith. My oldest one has got his own, probably maybe 2. He is so driven that it's sometimes that can be a detriment too. And I'm like, I got to kind of reel him back, like, oh boy, so every kid's got their own struggle. So
yeah.
I don't know. We'll see. How it goes. Yeah.
Well, I'm with you on the John Eldridge book. I'll recommend that if anybody's listening. That also completely changed my perception of church, my perception of God. It led me in some different directions. And maybe one day this podcast will be popular enough that I can get John Eldridge on here. What do you think?
Hey, that'd be great.
I'd
like to come back for that one.
Yeah, I got to get some people to email him and get him on here for me. That'd be awesome. All right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and this is completely up to you, obviously. But do you want to throw out an email or something if anybody relates to your story and wants to get a hold of you or contact you at all? If not, completely fine. But I just figured I'd offer it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always willing to connect with people. I'm always hesitant to throw out in this world of like where people get into your emails, or you get like people with nefarious reasons. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If
Are
anyone,
any kind of social media or anything, do you do it?
No,
do you dabble in any kind of that?
Nope, I don't.
Nope,
as a matter of fact, I would end with this: social media is the devil. I just stay away to some degree.
I don't necessarily disagree. Yes.
Yeah,
how about this? If anybody wants to get a hold of Jake, get a hold of me. You've got my information, and absolutely. I will pass it along to Jake.
Absolutely, I'm always open to that. Like anything I can do to help someone's journey. So.
All right, man. That sounds good.
Yep.
We all appreciate you coming on tonight. Thank you so much. It was great and a good time, and hopefully, I'm sure you really touched some lives with some great examples and some great stories and some great testimony.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Chad. It was great for my first podcast. It was a good experience.
Number one. So. Very nice. Yep. All right, man. Well, we'll see you another time. We appreciate it and wish you all the best.
Okay. Thanks, Chad. You too.
Hey, a big shout out to Jake for being open and honest and genuine and inviting all of us to give up and let go in prayer and shouting out to God. Give it up to Him and just see. It's an invitation to give up to God and just see what He has in store that most likely we can't even imagine. Hey, if you want to connect with Jake, feel free to get a hold of me, because as you heard, he does not like social media. I'll connect you, don't worry. And as always, you can get me at chad.campese@gmail.com or on Facebook, LinkedIn, and even Instagram. Send me a message. And please, 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 if this helped you in any way, would you share the episode with one person you think might be open to hearing it? Would you share it on social? Maybe even leave a review? You could literally be changing and saving lives by sharing the podcast with others. All right, guys, I don't know what I have in store for you next time, but I'll figure it out. And until then, I will catch you on the other side.